Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's joint webinar with McAfee and ecosystem partners Seclore and Titus. Your panelists today are Brian Brown from McAfee, Wally Bateau from Seclore, and Corey Markle from Titus. If you have questions, go ahead and add those in the chat, and we'll address those questions at the end of the presentation. And now I'll turn it over to Brian.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sylvia. And thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Brian Brown, Regional Solution Architect from McAfee, and we're very glad that you're joining us. So what are we here to discuss with you today? Many concerns have emerged by data protection and web access customers who felt that they've been left behind by Symantec in light of the Broadcom acquisition. So we're going to take stock of the current state of the nation and move on to how customers are being led down the garden path. Next, we'll present a joint value proposition from Titus, McAfee, and Seclore, and show you how, via a three-step process, we provide the framework for an easy transition from Symantec data and web protection to our combined solution. Slide. In today's enterprise landscape, there are many hurdles to overcome. Digital transformation and cloud adoption has been a huge business enabler, but it has simultaneously brought new security challenges by increasing the available attack surface due to a any device, anytime, anywhere access model. At the same time, the sophistication of adversaries has pivoted to become more stealthy and more capable, leading to undetected breaches with potentially disastrous consequences. Compounding that fact is a fundamental lack of available skilled security professionals who are unable to keep up with the cyber arms race of attacks versus detection and response capability. Next slide. As we see more acquisitions in the security space, we see more challenges that are presented as outcomes from a misalignment of strategies between a hardware company like Broadcom and a software company like Symantec. Under the new ownership, can you be confident that Broadcom is driving to the same objectives as your business? Are they addressing the pervasive adoption of cloud? Many security companies have made significant investments in the value of intelligence, which has been compromised by cost-cutting post-acquisition due to the sale of significant data feed sources. Security is a business of trust, and how do you ensure that your vendor partner is there for you in times of change? It comes down to representation, and that's a key area where Broadcom has made their customers feel that they aren't as important as they used to be. Slide. Concerns of the acquisition of Symantec are being echoed by industry analysts who are painting a picture of a challenging future for those who have invested in Symantec's technologies. What appears to be a strong investment move may benefit those who are behind the scenes and not necessarily customers. In fact, we are seeing evidence of this being publicly displayed. So what is the reaction? Next slide, please. So what has the reaction been from customers after the fundamental shift in business strategy by Broadcom? Overall, I'd have to say it's dissatisfaction. As evidenced by blog comments, news articles, and more, Symantec's customers are very unhappy, as shown by some of the testimonials here. Clearly, there's a misalignment, and Symantec customers have been left behind. After significant investments, questions are now present about what is my path forward? How can I deal with this situation and make it easy? Well, you know what? We have a solution, and let's take a look. McAfee, Seclore, and Titus have come together to ensure that we can solve key problems for Symantec customers. First, we keep you secure by focusing on defending your data and infrastructure against threats from device to cloud. In addition, our approach surfaces true threats while enabling customers to deal with the signal to noise ratio effectively. All of this would be ineffective if we didn't have the ability to implement data-centric controls that follow data through its life cycle and allow for automation of process that help overcome some of those resource shortages we referenced before and reduce not only mean time to detect and respond, also the operational burden of managing disparate controls and consoles. How does our triumvirate make this transition an easy process for you? Well, we've isolated what needs to be done into 3 simple, easy to accomplish steps with McAfee, Seclore, and Titus, building upon the strengths of each other. This is really where the sum is greater than the parts. And when you combine that with the focus on 3 key outcomes, this is where the value to you comes in. So what are those 3 outcomes? First, you need to know what to protect, what sensitive data exists in your environment, and how to classify it. Then you need to know where to protect your data throughout its life cycle, on any device or cloud service at any time. Finally, you need to focus on how to protect your data, using not only policies, but also more sophisticated capabilities like rights management. So as a Symantec customer, what do you do now? Hey, Wally, having worked with Symantec and their partner ecosystem, how has the Broadcom acquisition affected the...
Yeah, thanks, Brian. This is Wally Bateau with Seclore, and it's not just our customers, but really customers globally have had certain expectations set. And what I'll kind of call the before picture, or this is ultimately the Symantec messaging, which has been excellent messaging. You know, ultimately, it's what I'll call your data-centric security life cycle. You know, classify, discover, protect, and analyze that complete picture to understand your data, know where it is, and make sure it's protected anywhere it travels. And it really, the focus at the end really was around something that they coined ICE, which is information-centric encryption. And really, this was Symantec's attempt at digital rights management, what Seclore is all about. And really, it created what I'll call a means to an end. So when you think of DLP, certainly DLP can discover, identify, monitor information, but now it was able to actually act upon that by protecting sensitive information anywhere it travels. The same holds true for classification. So again, classification typically known for identifying what the content is, putting metadata inside the documents themselves. Now it becomes actionable by actually protecting the data with information-centric encryption. And then thirdly was CASB. So now we're talking about cloud access security brokers, the ability to really discover information in the cloud, much like DLP does on the endpoint or network. But in this case, again, to become actionable, not just to stop data from leaving the cloud, because it really needs to exit in many use cases, but to ensure that it is protected or the action becomes encrypted with rights management. So it really became the core of making each of those offerings much, much better. And the byproduct was from an analytics perspective. So now that you have information that's protected, you can now track anywhere that protected information is going throughout the world, anywhere it resides, and it reports back how it's being used. So you have an ability now to not just see the typical enterprise information, what's within your 4 walls, but now you can see how your information, especially confidential information, is being used anywhere throughout the world. So you're getting much deeper insights. So that was the before picture. They did a great job doing it. So let's now flip to the after picture, which I'm calling the bait and switch, right? So ultimately what happened was ICE, which became this kind of core to all of those components, you know, has now been sunsetted. So now you don't have a means to the end for the other products. Tagging, or their ICT, their classification and tagging, also sunsetted, which means you don't have the ability to identify what your content is, which ultimately made DLP and CASB weaker. And because neither of those products can now protect information, you lost the audit trail capability for that secured information. So you've lost some insights. So they've kind of went from this overarching data-centric security lifecycle of classify, discover, protect, and analyze to now just discover and analyze. So it did create a big hole, but certainly the expectations have now been set that this was the right approach. How do I get there? So as we progress forward here between the three of us, the picture ultimately looks much the same, right? So certainly data classification can be the first stage in the process. Let's understand our data. Let DLP and CASB discover it based on the discovery rules. One of them can be seclore it, which I use as a verb, but ultimately protect it. And later on, we'll talk about what protection really means, and ultimately feed that to our analytics engine. So now we understand how our data is being used. So this is a fully integrated, best of breed offering from McAfee, Seclore, and Titus. And so if we can progress to the next slide, the thing that I'm hearing from Symantec customers is that, okay, great, we have a very viable replacement, tightly coupled, bundled offering, best of breed, but I just finished my deployment. I finally got my rules, my logic all figured out from the Symantec standpoint. How do I make this a true and simple transition? How do I do that without having a complete do-over and go through months and months of effort? And so what we're finding is that digital rights management can really become an accelerator to the deployment. So those typical business rules that are created by, committee, decision by committee, what do I do? Move, delete, quarantine. It's a different product. I have to do trial by error, a lot of cycles and testing. So I basically at the beginning have a lot of exceptions, or what I'll call false positives. I then, to kind of loosen up the rules, now am I getting too lax and defeating the purpose of DLP? The easy answer is seclore it, right? Just protect it. So in all those gray areas, just make sure this information is going out protected, knowing that the recipient has a frictionless experience, which is key. Always the balance between security and usability. So we found that, potentially, millions or hundreds of thousands of exceptions can now get boiled down to, hundreds and thousands. So it's much more manageable. And it creates also a longer term effect, which we call kind of the optimization side. So the ongoing administration of a McAfee solution now can be reduced internally because I have less exceptions to deal with. And so the combination of being able to deploy it quickly, to be able to administer it much more effectively, improves my overall return on investment, right? So less services for my vendors, less internal folks needed to support the project, and ultimately my time to value is the byproduct. I can now reap the benefits of the Titus McAfee Seclore solution. And I kind of call it as a bonus from a Symantec takeout perspective, because ultimately we're addressing that do-over concern head on. So, that's been the biggest, kind of feedback that I've received from Symantec customers, is make this simple for us. And so that's certainly what this three-legged stool is addressing. So if we can kind of progress, the ultimate solution, as I mentioned, is this kind of data-centric security lifecycle. And really the first cog in the wheel is understanding your data and the data classification. So I was going to turn it over to Corey from Titus. And Corey, can you provide us with some insights as to how Titus easily enables customers to get started with minimal overhead?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Wally. Appreciate you taking us through that. Thank you, everybody, for being here. In this portion, I'm going to take you through a little bit about who Titus is as a company, some of the feature parity that we have with Symantec's ICT or info-centric tagging solution, some of the key differentiators, and how all that complements the McAfee and Seclore solutions. For those of you that don't know us, Titus is a 50-year-old company, and we take pride in being the global experts in data classification and data identification. We've got some key capabilities in how we detect and identify unstructured data at creation, at rest, and across a variety of platforms. And we use what's called the Titus data detection engine to not just add classification values, but to give identity and context to the data. And some of the key outcomes of that are an understanding of how data should be handled by both humans and downstream technologies, but also have a better experience with those investments. And this also allows organizations to reduce breaches and help towards compliance. So the next few slides really serve to assure existing Symantec ICT customers that Titus has all the capabilities of ICT solution and more. If you like ICT look and feel, we match our Symantec policies and schema, and we can also evolve that within our solution. And if you currently don't have ICT as part of your Symantec solution, then this actually can serve as a primer to the Titus solution and why data identification and classification has been recognized by a lot of leading analysts as a foundational element in a complete data protection strategy. So data classification is a tool that allows organizations to define sensitive data, apply a label or classification value, and then establish the rules for its protection. And you may be familiar with something that pops up in the workflow and engages with the user to help determine the sensitive nature of the data that the user is working on. And the Titus solution can do just that. Next slide, please. However, the evolution of the product has really provided us with ways to reduce the friction in the workflow by using a variety of techniques such as machine learning to identify and automatically apply a classification value and metadata attributes that can help reduce the friction in the workflow, the user interruptions. In a few slides, I'll get into the technology that we have that allows users that flexibility. So as we engage with users in the workflow, this gives organizations the flexibility to help educate and raise user awareness of just how sensitive the information that the employees are working on may be. When employees are hired, we ask them to sign and review company policy on how to handle sensitive information. And a lot of organizations have 20-minute training every January that they do on how to handle sensitive information. And then we expect employees to remember it for a year. So the security awareness and the data classification, the label can definitely help with that. And as an extension of the security awareness, labeling and watermarking are also built into our solutions. So there's lots of combinations of what this could look like, including portion marking, adding partner or customer names, really making sure that it's clear to both the creator and the consumer of the data on how exactly to handle that information. Open ecosystem built for enterprise. So Titus is all about open ecosystem and working with other security technologies. With data identification and classification really being fundamental in a complete data security strategy, we can work out of the box with the majority of your existing investments, of course, including our friends at McAfee and Seclore. And it really comes down to the metadata that we apply, and I'll touch on that in a few slides. The final item that I want to get across that we have for ICT parity is the reporting and auditing. Titus allows organizations to review the classification values through a dashboard or surface our reports to third-party tools, such as Splunk or McAfee's own ESM solution. And this gives additional insights into organizational risk and data value. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how was this done? And it's all done via the data detection engine that I mentioned in slide 1, which allows for powerful data identification. So, we use tools such as regex and pattern matching, but there's a lot of false positives in that. And we can reduce false positives using something we call smart regex. And this supports kind of an advanced search. Smart regex lets you search for a specific sequence of words, phrases, and numbers that really help you locate that needle in the middle of the document haystack with fewer false positives than the traditional regex. And we can also help deduce the types of documents that we're working on. Data categorization using machine learning allows us to identify a topic of a document or an email based on the words it contains and compares that against a model. So organizations may have a lot of data that's unique just to them, and we can use machine learning to help understand the bucket that data falls into and add further identity and context. And finally, we can help with personal data detection. We use a machine learning solution, more specifically deep learning solution with natural language processing that provides the ability to detect highly personal content that might uniquely identify an individual based on the presence of other personally identifiable information, such as a name and address. So let's say an employee's drafting an email and says, sciatica is painful. It's really not personally identifying information, but if you have an email that says, hey, sciatica is painful, and I might be taking leave of absence and I need to go see a doctor combined with a name and an address, then that becomes some confidential HR PII, and the Titus solution can help with that. So why am I touching on the data detection engine so much? Being able to accurately detect and identify data and the context are super crucial to an effective data classification solution. The other crucial element is surfacing that identity via metadata. And a lot of other solutions out there don't understand the context and simply apply labels and singular metadata values. So you can imagine this simple classification label of confidential. And what does that really tell us about the data? You know, if you look at that HR and sciatic example, is it PII? Is it, does it fall under legal holds or retention policies? Next slide, please, Sylvia. Titus metadata is a little bit different. You have the ability with it to be customize it and make it actionable and specific. We have the ability to actually write something called extendable metadata to a file. And what we mean by extendable metadata is really just the ability to have unlimited fields and information about the data itself. And these can all be customized to meet the organization's individual requirements. So with Titus, we take the data found in files, in the case on screen, a sensitive document like a mortgage loan agreement, and we convert that to information. Information that we place in the document properties of the file so that it's persistent. That means it can actually travel with the file. So we take a look at the mortgage loan agreement on screen and we put it in a table so that it's easier to read. You know, our machine learning categorization algorithm sees that it's categorized as a loan agreement. It's found some PII information, but due to the context that we've captured, it is in scope for GDPR. It's not to be shared. There's a retention date applied, and there's a classification value of confidential. And we'll take this one step further. It's confidential, customer confidential. So all this metadata that we apply can be picked up by other security investments. And the result of this is that you have a DLP solution within the organization that is granular enough to meet a modern workplace security needs. So once you have a trustworthy source such as Titus to accurately identify and add metadata, almost think of it as pre-processing of the data, partners such as McAfee and Seclore can pick up on that context and identity and have very specific handling instructions. So with Titus, organizations can really simplify and unify the ecosystem so that every security investment is speaking the same language. And there's 3 thoughts I'm going to leave you with as I conclude my portion. So 1, Titus is the leader in data identity and data classification, and you can trust us to replace your existing ICT solution. If you're transitioning and you like your existing ICT configuration, we can keep that or help you evolve it based on best practices and capabilities. And then we can connect the taxonomy and configurations to Seclore and McAfee through our metadata. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Brian to review the McAfee solution. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Corey. And sounds like we've got some really powerful capability on the Titus side that we can then consume as part of McAfee's portion of the joint value proposition. So let's take a look about how we are protecting protecting data as it moves through its life cycle. So we learned about the what to protect from Corey. Now we're going to look at the where to protect and how to do that with some of McAfee's technology. Next slide, please. If we follow data through its life cycle, many of the concerns of organizations are stemming from initiatives like digital transformation. And in the shift to cloud, many enterprises are attempting to repurpose existing solutions. Perhaps they would start by leveraging their data protection solution that's present on their endpoints and network. The challenge there is it leaves gaps as data traverses the cloud edge. And what do we do about data that's born in the cloud? In today's world, a vast majority of the data, all the data that's created, is actually created in the cloud itself. And so that leaves a gap from the perspective of endpoint and network coverage with what exists with on-prem DLP technologies. Maybe you want to leverage web protection controls that deal with data while it's in motion. And we might use some aspect of network DLP and maybe our web gateway to do that. But that then subsequently leaves gaps at both ends of the spectrum. On the left-hand side with a mobile workforce potentially, but we don't have the ability to implement those controls on a mobile device, and up in the cloud for cloud traffic itself. It also doesn't address concerns like east-west data or inter-CSP data in the cloud. Finally, there may be a native cloud solution that addresses web and cloud use cases, but that really has no connection back to data and policy management that exists on the ground, perhaps with our endpoint and network solutions. So the net result is that while we're present in cloud in various stages of adoption to whatever that means to your organization, there are fundamental data and threat protection challenges which hamper our ability to gain the advantages of cloud. Long story short, all of this is complexity. There are control gaps. It's an administrative burden and a huge amount of overhead for us to try and stitch all this together with our existing resources, which are already in short supply. And the net result is that we can't move at the speed of cloud. So how is it that we address some of these challenges? McAfee's mVision Unified Cloud Edge closes these gaps by converging technologies of CASB, DLP, and Secure Web Gateway, and unifying them to bring huge benefits, such as common policies and insights that help significantly reduce the administrative burden, unified management of policies across all the control points that we've talked about, which also has a good benefit of yielding more consistent results from policy enforcement to risk management outputs and reporting, and also allows for the capability to review and respond to incidents in a unified manner across the entire infrastructure, so you can clearly view how your sensitive data is being used from device to cloud. No longer do you have a patchwork of products to achieve this. All of it is combined under the banner of McAfee's Unified Cloud Edge. Converges the CASB, DLP, and software Secure Web Gateway products, each of themselves, which are award-winning products, to offer unprecedented data protection and threat defense between device and cloud, including centralized policy control and incident management that we touched on, allowing you to set data policy once across device, network, and cloud domains, or run one incident report for activities across all those domains. Not only improves security efficacy, but also relieves that operational burden. Integrated threat defense between Secure Web Gateway and CASB products, allowing the Web Gateway to benefit from customized risk scores based on detailed security assessments of more than 50 risk attributes across multiple cloud environments that's driven through the CASB, reducing the attack surface and automating policy and threat intelligence dissemination for positive effect. Closed loop remediation to take action everywhere from device to cloud, rapidly closing incidents across the infrastructure and prevent new ones, aligning with industry frameworks such as Gartner's Secure Access Service Edge or SASE model, where we provide coverage for all of the data-centric controls in the SASE framework, for example. There's more to this story though, so let's take a look at what our customers are saying. With the convergence of our technologies, we're leveraging those three long-standing proven solutions. Our data loss prevention technology, which has been in the marketplace for over 20 years, our Secure Web Gateway, which has existed for more than 20 years, and mVision Cloud, our award-winning CASB, which has been present for more than 9 years. Not only do we have a winning combination, but our customers support what we've brought to market by voting with Gartner's Peer Insight campaigns and demonstrating their willingness to recommend our combined technology, the McAfee UCE framework. Looking at what we provide, our cloud security coverage expands from the web to container workloads. We're protecting all varieties of cloud, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, and platform as a service. We're protecting data traveling to, from, within, and between the cloud, providing visibility to both sanctioned and unsanctioned cloud applications, configuration auditing for the cloud to detect provisioning mistakes or drift, offering UEBA in the cloud to detect anomalous behavior which may indicate a threat, and we defend the cloud itself against threats. McAfee understands that the cloud introduces new cloud-native threats that we haven't seen in other environments, and we've invested in a portfolio to cover the wide variety of use cases and cloud technologies for our customers. So where does this leave you? Well, let's take a second look and go back to analysts who have had doubt over the future of what the future holds for Symantec customers. In a recent Gartner Magic Quadrant for Secure Web Gateway, even before the Broadcom acquisition, there was a warning to customers about how their peers reviewed their relationship with Symantec. Clearly, it was not in a good state, and post-acquisition, that sentiment has only increased in prominence. When a solution is most likely to be replaced, you want to turn to a partnership that provides true benefits and can be trusted for the long term, like McAfee, Titus, and Seclore. To sum it up, McAfee's UCE fits into our story by converging technologies to bring real benefits to you as you travel on your digital transformation journey and take over where Symantec may have left you behind. From security efficacy, reliability, lower TCO, flexible use case support, UCE addresses the outcomes that are important to enterprises regardless of their size, scope, or vertical. Our goal is to make the transition off Symantec seamless, effective, and as Wally said, frictionless. So now that we've seen how the information has been classified, discovered, and we're providing an ultimate means to and now we need to provide the ultimate means to an end to ensure that sensitive data is protected anywhere it travels. So Wally, can you take us through Seclore's data-centric security platform, aka DRM?
I sure can. Thanks, Ryan, again. But before we get into what is data protection, digital rights management, IRM, et cetera, let's talk about why protection is so necessary. So the why. So I've taken the liberty of taking literally every use case known to man across every vertical industry and just rolled it under three buckets. The first is data leakage. This is the first concern of customers, which is every one of us has some amount of IP, customer information, employee information, and they simply don't want it leaked out, whether that's accidental or malicious. And certainly the combination of the three products allows for us to easily identify and discover and protect that information so that we no longer have data leakage. That's the easy one. The second one is a little more complex. Anymore what we see is that customers who perform their everyday workflow tasks do not perform it in the back office, meaning they don't perform it within their four walls. Just to finalize the daily activity, they need to work with external constituents. I've given a few examples here, but this is commonplace. Just doing my everyday tasks, I am typically sharing confidential, secure information with a number of different entities outside my organization. And in fact, I also have created external collaboration with the work from home folks that I now have. So the sheer nature of working from home is creating this external collaboration issue. And we need to make sure we're doing collaboration in a secure manner. And again, we can do that with a combination of DLP and CASB, make sure that information is always protected anywhere it travels. And the third use case is compliance. So if you're not paying attention to your information while Big Brother is, there's some 3 or 4 letter acronym who will slap some steep fines on you if you're not controlling your data. So every one of our customers, our joint customers, are really addressing these three things. And all three of these items affect their day-to-day. So what we bring to the table as we progress here is a data-centric framework, a unified policy engine. And the intent here is that this works completely embedded with the McAfee UCE combined framework. It works with the Titus framework. So the idea here is we all have to play together very nicely. And at the core, we provide certain capabilities of rights management, which is the endpoint, the network, email, cloud type of security. And the other component is audit trail. So always being able to track information that's protected anywhere it goes and how it's being used. And we can extend this framework easily by connecting with the Titus framework so that now the identification of information and the meta tagging can now be actionable. And one of those actions can be seclore it. So make sure it's always protected anywhere it travels. The same framework is tightly bundled and fully integrated with the McAfee DLP framework, the UCE framework, so that again, as things are being discovered, one of the actions right from their administration panel becomes a policy from Seclore to protect it. And as we go further from a CASB perspective, now we can do the exact same thing if it's on the endpoint, if it's on the network, or in this case, with the mVision CASB or the cloud integration, we now can ensure that information is always protected anywhere it resides. And it also then becomes a byproduct for analytics, right? So, we talked earlier about the ability for analytics to understand the information within the enterprise, within the four walls. I think that's been commonplace for forever. But now what you have the ability to do is understand your information has flowed outside of your organization. And it's important to understand, right? How is my data being used? How is it being consumed? Who's touching it? How often are they touching it? And my ability to then revoke those privileges. So let's look at a couple of the easy integrations that are all there today, tightly bundled. The first is as it relates to the endpoint. So in this case, an end user can create a file, save it. McAfee DLP can scan based on keywords and patterns, etc. And now it becomes actionable. What is the action? Seclore it. Protect this document so that anywhere it travels, simple data leakage scenario, it will not be accessible by the wrong individuals. We can extend that on the next slide with email. So in this case, an email is simply sent out by a user. It goes through the typical cloud service email infrastructure where McAfee scans for the email and the attachments and basically updates the X header based on whatever that rule is. That X header will be interpreted by Seclore, where again, a particular protection policy is placed on it. So the recipient now can receive a completely protected email. That could be the attachments and even the body of the email, and also the ability with a complete workflow to respond back to the sender in a completely secure environment. And then the last one here is from a cloud perspective. So much like a DLP at the endpoint, ultimately documents are getting pushed up into the cloud. The concern certainly is any of the documents that are being extracted down and shared, et cetera, are now kind of free out in the space to be leveraged. What we want to do is have mVision identify it and become actionable such that a policy is applied to it. So now customers feel comfortable with the fact that any of these cloud applications, the information, instead of stopping it from download, and it's probably a requirement to pull it out and share it for external collaboration, they can now do this in a very secure environment. So on the next slide, we talked about protection, securing it. What does that mean, right? So many of you are very familiar with encryption, encryption at rest, encryption in motion. Well, ultimately, rights management is encryption in use, encryption on steroids, right? Because it provides all these granular capabilities on top of just encryption. And while the document is open and still encrypted, we are basically answering 4 key questions. The first is, who? Are you the right individual or group of individuals that should be accessing this information? And we provide an identity access management framework so we can work with any of the typical identities in AD or other, et cetera. And in single sign-on. So the first pass is, are you the right person? And if you pass muster, then step 2, we answer the question is the usage controls. What can you do with it? Are you simply a collaborator for viewing purposes? Can you edit and respond to me? Can I allow you to print? We have a very specific copy and paste secure function. So you can only copy from a secure document and paste it into another document of equal security. We can block things like screen grabs. We can allow the user to share with the same rights that they've been given. We can allow you to work in offline mode. So you're disconnected from the internet, you're on the beach. We're still controlling the 4 Ws is what we coin them while you are disconnected from the internet, because we cache those rights to your computer. The third one is time-based, and probably a good use case would be M&A, mergers and acquisitions, right? I'm sharing, there's a due diligence period, I'm sharing my financials. I certainly would like those financials to disappear after the due diligence period is over. So we have the ability to time bomb information to either a very specific date and time or so many days once it was first accessed. And last but not least is location-based controls, or the where. Good use case, GDPR. Maybe you can open the document up while you're in the EU, but same laptops move to the US and no longer is accessible. So we can create that geofencing capability. We could lock it down to the device. So perhaps the CEO downloaded board notes to his tablet. Well, we want to make sure that it can only open up on his tablet. He can't share it any other way, so it's locked to that device. Or maybe some customers feel that mobility is a little bit too flexible and concerning from a security perspective. So we can block any access from a mobile device if that's a requirement. And all of these things are persistent, right? All of these granular controls are persistent and above and beyond encryption. And so there's really two halves to rights management. The first half, as I talked about, is this protection and enforcement of the policy. On the next slide, the second half talks about the compliance and regulation, right? So once we protect a document, every time it is being accessed, it's reporting back to the audit trail. This simple example shows some activities that can be both authorized activities that we're tracking or unauthorized attempts. I let Sylvia view the document, but not print it. Well, she tried to print it, we blocked it, but we also logged that event. That may tell me something as the owner of the document, that either I should give her more rights, or maybe I'm not sure what she's doing, so I'm going to completely revoke access to that document. And I can do that very easily without resharing a document. I have full control. As we progress through the slide, we can get into very forensic detail, right? We can see classification tags. We can actually see the MAC ID address of where the computer that's accessing the document, the location of the file. We can see how long the user's been accessing the file. So a lot of good forensic details that may tell me something based on the type of organization I am. And now I have these insights that I never had before. And finally, as you progress, we also provide in our standard dashboard trend analysis. So you can get, kind of broader insights into high risk activities or unauthorized activities, just to give you a sense of what's happening with the data. And then you can drill down. And by the way, this data is open, meaning you can, you'll pull it into any SIM or universal dashboard, so you can kind of combine your enterprise data to information that's left the enterprise. So this is ultimately the last piece of the puzzle, right? So we identify data so that it becomes discoverable. We discover information so that it becomes actionable. The ultimate action, or the means to an end, is protecting that information, and sometimes more importantly, knowing how the information is being used. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Brian to see if you can kind of summarize what the audience has heard today, and let them know why we, the three of us are really the only game in town. Over to you, Brian.
Great, thanks, Wally. Very powerful capabilities with digital rights management there. Really appreciate that. So now that you understand how each one of Titus, McAfee, and Seclore help you address the data center controls after being left behind by Symantec, what does a joint solution look like? Well, we started with the what to protect, and Corey brought us up to speed on Titus's capabilities around the powerful classification engine, which then we can import into the McAfee framework. So that's steps 1 and 2. Through the McAfee framework, we then provide controls on the data as it flows through its life cycle, stemming from device to cloud, adding in the additional protective aspects of what Wally brought to the table with Seclore, and then tying all that back through a single console visibility and working with all of the operational controls that you might have in your environment. As Wally said, we need this to be frictionless to ensure success, not just with the security team, but also with end users who represent the business and who are the ultimate stakeholders of the sensitive information that we're protecting. Really, I think what we've done here is brought together a triumvirate between our three companies of an excellent capability that allows for an easy transition off of what Symantec provided in the past and what we can now provide to you. So just to sum it up, take us home, why us? Why look to Titus, McAfee, and Seclore? We bring together a winning combination of technology leadership via proven and innovative solutions that address true security outcomes, making an easy transition from Symantec with our joint partnership offering, and a completeness of vision that ensures that your data is safe throughout its entire life cycle. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn things back over to our moderator, Sylvia. Appreciate your time today.
Sylvia, you might be on mute.
On behalf of McAfee, Seclore, and Titus, we thank you all for joining this webinar today. And for more information, please visit the SIA Partner Directory. But in the meantime, while you're looking at that slide, we do have a couple questions that have come in. And we're going to start with this first question for Seclore, surrounding data rights management. Can you simply state the difference between encryption and rights management?
Sure. Thanks, Sylvia. Great question. And in fact, that usually is a question that comes up a lot, right? Because sometimes we get kind of bundled into it, and certainly encryption is a part of our offering. But let me maybe focus on encryption itself. If I sent you an encrypted document, Sylvia, and we were collaborating, I need to give you the key to unlock it. And once you unlock the document, I no longer have any control of what you're doing. And maybe more importantly, I have no visibility, right? So with rights management, not only is encryption still there, encryption in use, but I can revoke privileges, I can extend privileges at any point in the process, and I have complete visibility as to what you're doing with the document, both from a authorized standpoint as well as unauthorized attempts that you might have made. So I know what you're doing, Sylvia. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Wally. The next one is for Titus, for Corey at Titus. Corey, the question says, you mentioned data classification and data identity. What are the key differences? Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Sylvia. So classification is essentially adding metadata and labels. Whereas data identity and data identification is really understanding additional attributes and information about the data to add context to the data, and understand if it represents risk to the organization. Once you can understand those additional attributes, you can apply the extendable metadata values. And this really allows you to get extremely granular on policing the data, surfacing it to third-party solutions such as Seclore, McAfee, or other ecosystem partners, reducing false positives, reducing false negatives, understanding when sensitive data should be encrypted or blocked. It's really all about context.
Thank you for that, Corey. So here's one for Brian at McAfee. So Brian, this has multiple parts to the question. It says, how would you solve the following use case that Symantec covered? 1, a set of words are configured as confidential. 2, a user is sending an email with some of the previous words configured as confidential, either in the subject, the message, or a file attached. And 3, without any knowledge by the sender, i.e. completely transparent, Symantec detects the wording and encrypts the message. So the final thing says, if he's right, it was done using ITC and ICE, or even just the latter. So maybe that's for a combination of you guys, not just you, Brian, but speaking of ICE, maybe that's something Wally could address as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sylvia. And I think really the answer is going to have multiple parts in that scenario. And I'm going to turn things over just briefly to Wally to address the ICE aspect initially, because I think that's where the biggest degree of overlap is in terms of how we would address that particular use case scenario.
So from an ICE perspective, I don't like to bash the competition, but certainly ICE had all the messaging that Seclore has. It has all the ideas around how you can protect information anywhere it travels. The mere fact of it is, it was an immature product, right? It was just starting to come to fruition before it was sunsetted. So certainly we provide, and we've had our product out for 10 plus years now. So it's a hardened product. It works very well with other security capabilities, as we talked about with McAfee and Titus. And it certainly provides, it's always, your security vendor is as good as the security it provides, right? So it has to be, so to speak, impenetrable. We believe we've come up with a lot of the silver bullets to ensure you cannot circumvent the security. We keep keys separate from the documents to keep an extra layer of security. We allow for usability and frictionless experience so that we ensure that the whole balance between security and usability is very, very manageable. And we believe that combination is what really sets us apart from any other DRM vendor out there today.
And
Thank you very much for that, Wally.
Sylvia.
Oh, go right here, Brian.
Yeah, no, this is Corey, actually. If you don't mind, I'll add to that in just the data context and the data identity piece that that I had touched on during the Q&A and also in my portion. Understanding the context up front, and I think the question revolved around making this frictionless, right? And so having the option to understand the data identity and data context and really get a good sense that, hey, we've identified sensitive content, and being able to put a classification label on there. We can do that completely unbeknownst to the user. Having the technology that we use in the data detection engine can understand that data, and then basically not have to engage with the user anymore. If the organization still wants to engage with the user, that's one of the prerogative that's up to the organization. Some organizations tend to do that to make sure that people are thinking all the time of the sensitivity of the information they're handling. But we can use a data detection engine to be completely frictionless in the workflow and surface a classification value of, let's say, confidential that needs encryption, and Seclore can pick up on that as well. So just another way of solving that particular use case.
Thank you so much, Brian. So an additional question back to Titus. How can I use my existing ICT classification schema if switching to Titus?
That can be done using something called schema matching. So if you like the look and feel of your existing investments in ICT, you like the policies, you like the pop-up, and you like the classification values that you're currently using, we can take those and match them with Titus classification values. So the existing information that's out there already can be brought into the Titus umbrella, and we can read and pick up on that. So we can match the current solution, or we can choose to evolve it based on the additional capabilities that Titus offers.
Thank you, Corey. And then finally, our last question is back to Seclore for Wally. You mentioned a frictionless experience for someone receiving a data rights management protected document. How is this accomplished?
Yeah, so we have the ability for recipients to consume a protected document without any agent. Agents in many cases require admin rights, although we do provide an agent where it's applicable. It does not require any admin rights. But when we talk about completely frictionless, means no agent requirements. So you can leverage any browser to open up the document. The document is still encrypted, so it's going to look exactly like an Office or PDF or whatever the document type is. However, we will continue to control it. So we provide the ability to leverage any browser with single sign-on type of capabilities, while still enforcing what I called the 4 Ws earlier in the presentation.
Thank you, Wally. Looks like we have time for one more question that just came in. What's a deployment effort look like? Professional service engagement from all 3, or how would one handle the rolling out of the solution? Is there anything that any of you gentlemen can add to that question?
This is Brian from McAfee. Let me jump in on that one. So obviously what you've seen before you is a joint solution. part of the value proposition that we've articulated is making this frictionless. And natural question about, how do we get from here to there, not just the technology aspects. And certainly what we've seen based on past experience and working with our partner organizations from McAfee's lens is that there's going to be likely a degree of professional services that would be used in combination with some education and learning capabilities, and really can look to any one of us for is taking the lead and the charge on that from the perspective of how we stitch this together. There are a lot of moving parts, but a lot of the burdens in terms of standing the solution up have already been thought out very well in terms of what we put together with the solution architecture. So it's about minimizing the requirement for a lot of the upfront work, and Titus does a lot of the heavy lifting. Seclore really takes off a lot of the concerns at the back end, and then from an implementation perspective, putting things all together, we engage with the customer and determine to what extent something like a professional services engagement would be necessary.
All righty, and with that concludes all the questions, and that concludes our webinar today. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. And thank you, panelists, for your participation.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thanks, Sylvia. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.